Assalamu alaikum and greetings. My name is Kondagar Kais and I'm currently pursuing a career as an insurance loss adjuster in Tista Surveyors. Recently, we're seeing a great influx of insurance claims, most of them in relation to mobs, miscreants, unruly people, housebreaking, and incidents similar to those. So I'm filming this video in hopes that it may serve as an instrument so that we may be well informed and well revised in dealing with claims as such. So at the very core of handling such insurance claims, we know that such claims which are related to incidents involving mobs or miscreants or unruly people are only covered in standard fire policies if riot and strike endorsement is taken. So the Riot Tariff actually offers provisions for two kinds of endorsements and further two kinds of extensions. So the endorsements are riot and strike damage and riot fire damage. A and B. So riot and strike damage and riot and fire damage, though they have similar kinds of exclusions, mainly exclusions related to loss due to cessation of work or loss of income. So though both of them have these similar exclusions, riot fire damage further excludes loss due to theft during or after the occurrence of a fire. So this is something to also note. Though we seldom see any riot fire endorsements, most endorsements we see are riot and strike, but it is something to keep in mind as well. But there is one thing that both of them have in common is the condition 6. The condition 6b of the riot tariff excludes loss of kinds such as riot and strike if the civil commotion is directed towards the overthrow by force of a government. So the one another thing that the riot and strike damage and riot fire damage endorsements have in common is the condition 6 of the riot tariff. So the condition 6 of the riot tariff, specifically condition 6b, states that if the damage that has occurred is in related to civil commotions that are directed towards the forceful overthrow of a government, de jure or de facto, then it is not covered. De jure and de facto means even if a judicial body states it, or even it is by fact de facto, it is still considered that it is not covered. So at this point, many questions may start coming up. Like for example, then how do you classify a riot to be anti-government? How do you make sure that the loss that has occurred is due to an anti-government riot? Or is there any other reason to the loss? Maybe a malicious reason, maybe a reason for stealing. So how do you make sure that what is the loss being happened due to, is it covered or not covered? So I think to understand these questions, to tackle these questions, we may look into a more theoretical view as to why such an exclusion may have come up. We know that risks are classified into various classes, them being pure risk and speculative risk, or financial or non-financial risk, or fundamental or particular risk. You see, fundamental risks are risks where the effect is very widespread and it is not under the control of one person or a group of person, whereas in a particular risk the effect is affecting only a particular group of people or a person, and its effects are not as widespread. So insurance covers particular risks, but it does not cover fundamental risk. An example of fundamental risk could be an economic crisis where the effect is felt throughout the country, or even an anti-government movement where the effect is also felt throughout the country. So why wouldn't insurance cover a fundamental risk? You see, in situations where the effect of that risk is very widespread, in those situations the law of large numbers does not help insurance. So why is that? No matter how big the premium pool is, no matter how many people are involved in the insurance pool, the claims or the incidence of claims would be equally as large in case of an event where the whole country or the very wide range of that pool is affected. So that is why fundamental risks are avoided in insurance. It is also something to keep in mind that some risks may have both qualities of fundamental risk or particular risk depending on certain situations. For example, earthquake. In certain places of Japan, earthquakes are of so large a scale that it affects a wide variety of institutions and wide range of businesses. So in those places, earthquakes is not covered. But in Bangladesh, we can see that earthquake coverage is easily available through certain endorsements. So just like that, depending on the situation, it can be classified, the same risk can be classified as fundamental or particular. So then, how do we answer if a riot is anti-government or not? So it's very easy. If certain property is damaged due to rioters, then what we have to do is look into the demand of the rioters that they had at the time of the incident. Now here, anti-government does not really mean having anti-government views, but rather the riot should be directed, or the demand should be such that it is for the forceful overthrowing of a government. So if the rioters who were actually responsible for a certain damage were in fact having the demand that a certain government to be overthrown by force, then such riot falls under such a category. Now, what if the damage that had occurred is not due to rioters, and it is somehow evident that the people who are actually responsible for a damage were not in fact of the rioters, maybe some other people? In that case, is such a loss covered? So in the Riot Tariff, as I have said before, there are provisions for two extensions, one of them being malicious damage. Malicious damage, by definition, it means that damage, or loss or damage, it protects against loss or damage due to the malicious act of any person. Now, what does malicious act mean? Malicious act mean an act that is directed intentionally for the damage of one person. So such an act can be termed as malicious. Now it says that malicious act of any person. So any person would mean even the employees, or someone who is inside the institute, or of someone who is outside the institute. I'm assuming that it is a factory. So if the tariff says that it protects against the loss of malicious act of any person, we must consider that any person means even the employees or outside people. Now, it is also mentioned in the wording of malicious damage that what is covered under malicious damage must not be an act which is done in connection with the condition 6 of the riot tariff. So that is the condition that talks about the anti-government riots. So if the malicious act and the malicious actors who are identified has done it in connection with the government, anti-government riots, then such action or such a malicious damage will not be covered. Now it is also said in the wordings of malicious damage is that it does not cover damage due to fire, explosion, burglary, housebreaking, theft, or larceny. Now, this is an interesting topic to talk about because if you think about it, a person whose intention is to steal and is to rob will somehow always have malicious intent. So if the person is actually causing the damage for the purpose of stealing and robbing by the means of housebreaking, burglary, theft, or larceny, such a malicious act will not be covered under this coverage, this extension. I just want to point out one thing that in this wording it says that malicious damage does not cover any action that is done in the means of burglary or housebreaking or theft or larceny. So here we know that by definition, so for burglary, it has to be breaking and entering. So there might be an interpretation that if there is breaking and entering, then that is not a malicious damage. So if that holds right, that if breaking and entering becomes an exclusion for malicious damage, then only the people who are already inside can only cause malicious damage. So that reasoning might come up that only people inside of a business can, or a factory can be the reason for malicious damage. Anyone coming from outside breaking and entering might then fall under exclusion. You see, housebreaking and burglary is actually breaking and entering for the purpose of theft. So this is where intention is key. So if the intention is theft, pilferage, robbing, stealing, then it is not covered. But if it is due to some personal vendetta, they're breaking, entering, and they're breaking and they're setting it on fire, not on fire, fire is excluded. If they're vandalizing, then it does not fall completely in the definition of burglary. So that is why I think in the malicious damage wording it is said any person and not just any employee. We again have to think that if there was indeed a malicious damage that has occurred, is it covered or not? So the question can be also answered very easily. We have to see if that malicious damage is somehow connected to the anti-government riot. If not so, then we have to see if the malicious damage is a fire damage or an explosion damage. If they are not, then we have to again see if the malicious damage was actually directed for the pilferaging or stealing or robbing through the means of burglary or larceny or housebreaking. So if it was actually intended for burglary and robbing, that is not the coverage of malicious damage. But then again, there is also policy for burglary and housebreaking. So burglary and housebreaking policy actually covers the insured if there is any loss that may have occurred due to actual forced entry or exit into a premises. Now, the burglary and housekeeping policy also have some exclusions, among which an exclusion mentions that burglary and housebreaking losses which are directly or indirectly connected to some situations or some circumstances are excluded. So if the burglary that has happened or the damage that has happened due to burglary or housebreaking, that is forced entry, will be excluded if that forced entry is connected to some situations, whether it is directly connected or indirectly connected. Now, what are those situations? Those situations, there is a list of those situations such as war or civil war, or there are others. So among those, there is riot and strike. It does not even have to be an anti-government riot. It is riot or strike. So if the loss or damage is directly or indirectly happening because of a riot or strike, then that is excluded in the burglary or housebreaking coverage. Now, keeping all those factors in mind, we may come up with a line of questioning that may help us determine whether a certain claim is payable or not. So, first of all, we have to determine if the damage that has occurred is due to any rioters or not. So, if they were in fact rioters who had caused the damage, then we have to ask what were their demand at the time of the incident. Is the demand of something source of overthrowing of the government by force? If so, then it falls under the condition 6 and it is not covered. But if it is not, then maybe it is covered. So if we come to the conclusion that no, they were not rioters who had caused the damage, but they were someone else, so then we have to identify if there were any malicious intent. So assuming that the malicious damage extension is taken, so then we have to start questioning that is were there any malicious intent. So if we do identify that indeed there was a malicious intent, then we have to ask that if that malicious intent was for burglary or housebreaking or theft or larceny. If the malicious intent was for stealing and robbing, then it is not covered. If the malicious intent does not fall under those exclusions, then maybe it is covered under the malicious damage extension. Now let's say that the intention of the people who had actually caused the damage was stealing and robbing and burglary. So then we have to come towards the burglary and housebreaking policy. We have to see if the insured has that coverage as well. So if the insured has that coverage and it was indeed a burglary or housebreaking, then we have to ask, is it somehow directly or indirectly connected with riot and strike? If it is indeed somehow indirectly or directly connected with the riot and strike, then again it is excluded of the burglary and housebreaking policy. But if it is not, then maybe it is included in the burglary and housebreaking policy depending on the other exclusions. So if we go through this line of questioning, then maybe we will be able to identify if the damage is covered or not. So these are some of the questions that have come in front of me. I've tried to give my point of view and my thought process on trying to answer those questions. If there is any other thought process or perception, I would very much love to listen to them. If anybody wants, I can be reached at my email, khandoker.kayes@gmail.com. That's khondokar.kayes@gmail.com. I hope that Allah gives us strength in this crisis situation and we have the ability to deal with it. Yeah, thank you.